The briefing room at FOB Griffin smelled like burnt coffee and nervous sweat at 4 in the morning. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez sat in the back row, her chair pushed against the plywood wall, watching 6 Navy SEALs sprawl across the front seats like they owned the building. They probably thought they did. Lieutenant Commander Jake Mercer stood at the front, pointing at a satellite image taped to a whiteboard. His voice carried the easy confidence of a man who had done this 100 times. The target was a compound in the Karengal Valley, 14 kilometers east. High-value target, possible Taliban commander, standard extraction protocol. In and out, he said. 30 minutes on the ground, maybe less if the intel was good. Vasquez studied the terrain on the image. Mountains on 3 sides, a narrow valley floor, limited extraction routes. The kind of geography that kept snipers awake at night thinking about ambush angles. The liaison officer, a captain whose name Vasquez had already forgotten, cleared his throat and gestured toward the back of the room. "We have additional Overwatch support for this operation," he said. Staff Sergeant Vasquez will be positioned on the eastern ridge to provide eyes on the approach. Mercer turned. His gaze swept over her, quick and dismissive, the way someone might glance at a piece of furniture they had not ordered. She saw him take in her size, her features, the army patch on her shoulder. She knew what he was calculating. "You qualified on the Barrett?" he asked. Not really a question, more like a box to check. Vasquez met his eyes. "I am qualified on everything in your armory, Lieutenant Commander." One of the SEALs, a massive petty officer with a beard that violated about 6 regulations, snorted. Mercer's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. He turned back to his team. "All right," he said, voice dropping just enough that she was clearly meant to overhear. "Looks like we have a babysitter with a scope. Mission stays the same. Primary team handles extraction. Overwatch keeps the area clear of stragglers. Simple day." The SEALs nodded. A few glanced back at her with expressions ranging from amusement to indifference. None of them looked concerned. None of them looked like they expected her to matter. Vasquez said nothing. She had learned years ago that words wasted on men like Mercer were words that could be spent on things that actually changed outcomes. She opened her rifle case instead, running her fingers along the stock of her M2010. The weapon was not standard issue. She had modified the trigger pull herself, adjusted the cheek rest, hand-loaded every round in the magazine, with powder charges measured to the 10th of grain. This rifle had sent rounds downrange at distances that would make Mercer's eyes water. Have you ever been satisfying at something truly exceptional and watched someone assume you were ordinary because of how you looked? Maybe it was a job interview where they glanced at your resume and saw only what they expected to see. Maybe it was a competition where they counted you out before you even started. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from right now, and whether you have ever had to prove yourself to someone who underestimated you. Corporal Tran appeared at her elbow. Her spotter, a quiet 24-year-old from San Diego who had seen her shoot and never once questioned her capability. He had heard the babysitter comment. His jaw was tight. "You want me to say something?" he asked. Vasquez shook her head. "Let them think what they want. We're not here to change minds. We are here to do a job." But she could feel the old anger banked low in her chest like coals that never quite went out. She had felt it at Ranger School when the instructor told her she would never make the cut, that women lacked the physical capacity for precision shooting at combat distances. She had felt it during her first deployment when a battalion commander refused to let her deploy forward because he did not believe females belonged in combat zones. She had felt it every single time someone looked at her and saw a quota filled rather than a soldier trained. The SEALs filed out, heading for the helicopters. Mercer paused at the door, looked back at her one more time. For a moment, something like doubt flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the same easy confidence. "Wheels up in 20, he said. "Try to keep up." The door swung shut behind him. Vasquez finished her equipment check. Rifle, ammunition, range cards, backup optics, water, emergency beacon. Everything in its place. Everything ready. Tran watched her work. "You know something they do not," he said. It was not a question. She thought about telling him. About the classified addendum in her personnel file. About the 3 deployments they had scrubbed from the standard records. About the longest confirmed kill in theater, a shot that had never been officially acknowledged because the target had been a foreign national whose death would have caused diplomatic complications. She thought about the Ranger tab she had earned when they told her it was impossible, the sniper school graduation certificate that listed her as top of her class in a cohort of 42 men. Instead, she simply shouldered her rifle case and headed for the door. "I know that 2 miles is not as far as they think," she said, "and I know that when the shooting starts, nobody cares what you look like. They only care whether you can hit what you are aiming at." The helicopter rotors were already spinning when she stepped onto the tarmac. The night air was cold and thin, carrying the smell of aviation fuel and distant pine. Somewhere in those mountains, men were sleeping who would not see tomorrow's sunset. They did not know it yet. Neither did the SEALs who thought she was just a babysitter. Vasquez climbed into the Blackhawk, settled into her seat, and began reviewing the terrain maps one more time. The valley spread out before her in topographic lines, every contour a potential firing position, every ridge a possible ambush point. She traced the routes with her finger, calculating distances, wind corridors, bullet drop at extreme range. Tran strapped in beside her. The helicopter lifted off, banking east toward the mountains. Whatever happened next, she was ready. The Blackhawk banked hard over the eastern ridge, and Vasquez felt her stomach drop as the pilot brought them in low and fast. Below, the mountains spread out like broken teeth, black against the pre-dawn sky. Somewhere down there, the SEAL team was already approaching the compound. Somewhere down there, everything was about to go wrong. She did not know that yet. None of them did. The helicopter flared over a rocky outcropping designated OP Sentinel on the tactical maps. The landing zone was barely large enough for the aircraft's skids, a flat patch of stone surrounded by boulders that would provide concealment once they were on ground. The pilot held steady for 3 seconds, and Vasquez and Tran dropped out into the rotor wash, their equipment bags hitting the rocks beside them. Then the Blackhawk was gone, banking away into the darkness, and they were alone. The silence hit her first. After the thunder of the rotors, the mountain felt impossibly quiet. Just the wind moving through the rocks and the distant sound of the second helicopter carrying the SEAL team toward the valley floor. Tran was already moving, pulling out the spotting scope and rangefinder. Vasquez found her position, a natural depression between 2 boulders that gave her a clear line of sight across the valley. She set up the M2010 with practiced efficiency, bipod extended, stock adjusted, scope covers removed. The cold seeped through her gloves as she worked. "Range to compound," she said. Tran glassed the target. 3,400 meters to the main structure. SEAL insertion point is closer, 2,100 to the valley floor. Vasquez did the math in her head. 2,000 meters was long range. Anything beyond that entered territory where most shooters would not even attempt engagement. Wind, humidity, elevation, the rotation of the Earth itself, everything mattered at those distances. A mistake of half a degree meant missing by 30 feet. She had made shots at those ranges before. She would make them again if she had to. The SEAL team's helicopter touched down in the valley, a brief flare of dust visible through her scope. 6 figures emerged, moving in tactical formation toward the compound. Vasquez tracked them, watching their spacing, their movement patterns. Mercer was on point, moving with the fluid confidence of a man who had done this dozens of times. But something was wrong with their formation. They were bunched too tight for the terrain, clustered in a way that made sense for urban operations, but created vulnerability in the open ground of the valley. A single burst of automatic fire could hit 3 of them at once. Vasquez keyed her radio. Overwatch's eyes. Recommence près d'information. Terrain creates natural choke point at your 2 o'clock. Static crackled. Then Mercer's voice, clipped and dismissive. Copy, Overwatch. We have got it. She watched through the scope. The formation did not change. Mercer kept moving, his team trailing behind him in the same tight cluster. He ignored you, Tran said. Vasquez adjusted her scope, scanning the ridge lines above the compound. She was looking for the things that should not be there. Glints of metal, shadows that moved wrong. the subtle signs that someone was watching the valley the same way she was. At first, she saw nothing. The compound sat quiet in the pre-dawn darkness. No lights visible, no movement in the windows. The SEAL team approached the perimeter wall, stacking up for entry. Then she caught it. A flicker of motion in the upper window of the secondary structure. Not much, just a shape passing behind the glass, but enough. Someone was awake in there. Someone was watching. "Sentinel to Trident," she said into the radio. "I am seeing activity in Structure 2, upper floor. Possible lookout." Mercer's response came back flat. "Noted." The word hung in the air like a door closing. Noted. Not acknowledged. Not adjusting. Just noted, filed away, dismissed. Tran looked at her. He is not listening. Vasquez kept her eye on the scope. He will. She tracked the SEAL team as they breached the compound wall, flowing through the entry point in pairs. Professional movement, clean execution. Whatever else she thought about Mercer, he knew how to run an entry. The team disappeared into the main structure, and for 30 seconds, the valley was silent. Then Mercer's voice crackled over the radio. "Compound is dry. No target. Preparing for extraction." Vasquez felt something twist in her gut. A dry hole meant the intel was bad. Bad intel on a compound this deep in hostile territory usually meant one thing. She scanned the ridgelines again, moving her scope in slow arcs across the terrain. The eastern ridge, the northern slope, the scattered rocks above the valley floor where 100 men could hide and never be seen until they opened fire. There, movement on the northern ridge, then more on the eastern slope, then the western approach. Shapes emerging from positions they had held for hours, waiting. Tran saw it too. His voice went tight. "Contact. Multiple positions. They are everywhere." Vasquez's finger found the trigger guard. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope. The first muzzle flash erupted from the northern ridge, and the valley exploded into chaos. "Trident, Sentinel," she said, her voice steady even as the sound of gunfire crackled through the radio. "You have hostiles on 3 sides. Count is 30+. Recommend immediate extraction." The response was lost in static and screaming. She heard Mercer shouting orders, heard the distinctive crack of return fire, heard someone yelling that Kowalski was down. Through her scope, she watched the SEAL team scramble for cover behind a low stone wall, the only protection in the kill zone. They were pinned, exposed, 2,000 meters away from any help. Except her. Vasquez settled the crosshairs on the primary machine gun position, a fighter with a PKM sending streams of tracers into the valley. Range, 2,147 meters. Wind, 12 knots gusting to 18, full value from the east. Humidity affecting bullet drop by 0.3%. She calculated in the space between heartbeats. Tran called the wind. Vasquez adjusted. Her breathing stopped. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, climbing into the thin mountain air, beginning its long arc toward a target that had no idea death was already in flight. 2 full seconds passed. The machine gunner's head snapped back, and the PKM went silent. Lieutenant Commander Jake Mercer had been in firefights on 4 continents. He had been shot at in Fallujah, ambushed in Helmand, pinned down in a Nigerian jungle while extraction birds circled overhead unable to land. He thought he knew what it felt like when a mission went sideways. He was wrong. The valley had become a kill box in the span of 3 seconds. Muzzle flashes erupted from the ridgelines like deadly fireflies, rounds snapping past his head, kicking up dirt and stone fragments all around him. His team had made it behind a low wall of stacked rocks, maybe 3 feet high, the only cover within 50 meters. It was not enough. It was nowhere near enough. Kowalski was down, screaming, his thigh torn open by a round that had punched through muscle and nicked the femoral artery. Reyes and Mitchell were applying pressure, trying to stem the bleeding while rounds cracked overhead. The rest of the team returned fire, but they were shooting at muzzle flashes in the darkness, burning through ammunition with no clear targets. Mercer grabbed his radio. Command, Trident Actual. We are pinned down. Coordinates follow. Request immediate air support and medevac. The response made his blood run cold. Trident, nearest air support, is 45 minutes out. Medevac cannot land under fire. Advise you hold position. 45 minutes. They will be dead in 10. He risked a look over the wall and immediately ducked as a burst of automatic fire chewed into the stone inches from his face. The enemy had them zeroed. Every position on the ridge had clear sight lines to their cover. Moving meant dying. Staying meant dying slower. Petty Officer Danny Reyes crawled up beside him, his face splattered with Kowalski's blood. 6, he said, using Mercer's call sign. I count at least 40 shooters on 3 sides. They have got us bracketed. Mercer knew. He had walked his team into a textbook ambush, the kind they taught at BUD/S as an example of what never to do. The compound had been bait, the valley a trap, and he had led his men straight into it because he was too confident to listen to warnings about choke points and lookouts. The machine gun on the northern ridge opened up again, and Mercer braced for the impact. It never came. Instead, the gun went silent. Just stopped, mid-burst like someone had flipped a switch. Mercer frowned. Through the chaos of gunfire and shouting, he heard Reyes say something that did not make sense. What the hell was that? Then a voice came over the radio. Female, calm, utterly steady despite the battle raging around them. Sentinel. 1 down. Shifting to position 2. Mercer stared at his radio. The Overwatch position was 2 miles away. 2 miles. No one made shots at 2 miles in combat conditions, not with wind and darkness and the chaos of firefight. It was impossible. A second fighter dropped on the eastern ridge. Then a third. Reyes grabbed Mercer's arm. 6, someone is shooting them. Someone is actually hitting them from the Overwatch position. Mercer raised his head just enough to see through a gap in the rocks. On the eastern ridge, a fighter with an RPG was setting up, preparing to send a rocket directly into their position. At this range, the wall would not even slow the blast down. He opened his mouth to call the target. The fighter's chest exploded before he could speak. The RPG clattered to the rocks, unfired. Sentinel, the female voice said. RPG neutralized. You have a window east. Recommend displacement. Mercer's mind raced. The Overwatch sniper, the one he had dismissed as a babysitter, was shooting with precision he had only seen from the most elite marksman in the world. And she was doing it at ranges that should have been physically impossible. Trident copies, he said into the radio. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Can you suppress the northern ridge? Already engaging, she replied. For targets visible. Stand by. He watched through his scope as fighters on the northern ridge began to fall. 1, 2, 3 in rapid succession. The fourth dove for cover and did not reappear. Reyes was staring at him. Who is she? Mercer shook his head. He did not know. He had not bothered to find out. She was just the Overwatch, just additional eyes, just a babysitter with a scope. He had not asked for her qualifications beyond the basic checkbox. He had not looked at her record. He had not considered for 1 second that she might be the most important asset on this mission. Another fighter dropped on the western approach. Then another. The volume of incoming fire was decreasing. Not gone, not by a long shot, but the enemy was realizing that something had changed. Every time one of them exposed themselves to shoot, they risked a bullet from 2 miles away, finding them before they could pull the trigger. Kowalski's screaming had faded to moans. The tourniquet was holding, but he needed surgery within the hour or he would lose the leg. Maybe his life. Mercer keyed the radio again. Sentinel, we have 1 wounded critical. What is your count on remaining hostiles? The response came back clinical, professional. 14 confirmed kills. Estimate 20 to 25 remaining. I'm seeing movement on secondary position to the east. Possible reinforcements, 12 additional fighters. Reinforcements. Of course there were reinforcements. This ambush had been planned too well to leave anything to chance. Can you engage the reinforcements? There was a pause. Then her voice again. Affirmative. Range is 2,400 meters. I will need to relocate for angle. 2 minutes. 2,400 meters. Nearly a mile and a half. Mercer had never heard of anyone making combat shots at that distance. The Marine Corps record was somewhere around 2,300, and that was a single shot under ideal conditions, not sustained engagement in darkness with wind and enemy fire. He found himself saying something he never expected to say. "Sentinel, this is Trident Actual. Whatever you need, you have got it. We are counting on you." The radio clicked. "Copy, Trident. I will not let you down." Mercer leaned back against the wall, rounds still cracking overhead, his wounded man bleeding out beside him, his team's survival depending entirely on a woman he had mocked 3 hours ago. Reyes was watching him with an expression that mixed fear with something else. Something like wonder. "She is really doing it," Reyes said. "She is actually saving us." Mercer nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. 2 miles away, invisible in the darkness, Elena Vasquez was doing exactly that. Vasquez worked the bolt and chambered another round. The brass casing from her last shot clinked against the rocks beside her, joining the growing collection of spent cartridges. 14 kills in 6 minutes. Her shoulder ached from the recoil, a deep bruise forming beneath her uniform, but she barely noticed. Through the scope, the valley was a chaos of muzzle flashes and tracer rounds. The SEAL team huddled behind their inadequate cover while fighters on 3 ridge lines poured fire into their position. But the pattern was changing. The enemy had started aggressive, confident in their ambush, certain they had trapped easy prey. Now they were hesitating. Every time one of them rose to shoot, they risked joining the bodies already cooling on the rocks. Tran called out from beside her. Wind shifting, now 14 knots, gusting 22, coming around from the northeast. Vasquez adjusted her scope. The wind was the enemy at these distances, capable of pushing a bullet 10 feet off target by the time it traveled 2,000 meters. She had to read it like a language, interpreting the movement of dust and vegetation, calculating how the gusts would affect her rounds at different points along their flight path. "Target," Tran said. "Northern ridge, beside the large boulder." "Fighter with radio." She found him, a man crouched behind a rock formation, speaking urgently into a handheld radio, probably calling for those reinforcements she had spotted. If she let him finish that call, more fighters would pour into the valley. The SEAL team would not survive another wave. "Range," she said, 2,230 meters. Vasquez settled her crosshairs. The radio operator was partially concealed, only his head and shoulders visible above the rocks. A difficult shot, even at close range. At over 2,000 meters, she would need to thread the bullet through a window roughly 18 inches wide. She exhaled slowly, letting her heartbeat fade to a distant pulse. The world compressed to the circle of her scope, the tiny figure of a man who did not know he had seconds to live. The rifle cracked. The bullet climbed into the darkness, riding the wind, dropping in a long parabolic arc toward the northern ridge. The radio operator slumped forward. The radio tumbled from his hand. Tran marked the kill on his notepad. 15. Vasquez was already scanning for the next target. On the western ridge, 2 fighters had set up a PCAM machine gun behind a natural rock barrier. They were smart, staying low, only exposing the barrel of the weapon when they fired. But smart was not enough when someone could see the heat signature of the barrel through a thermal scope. She switched optics, clicking the thermal overlay into place. The machine gun barrel glowed white against the cool blue of the rocks. The fighters themselves were hidden, but she could see their positions based on how they moved the weapon. One of them leaned out to adjust the ammunition belt. Vasquez fired. The fighter spun and dropped. His partner grabbed for the gun, trying to bring it back into action. Vasquez worked the bolt, chambered, fired again. Both machine gunners lay motionless. The PCAM pointed uselessly at the sky. 17, Tran said. His voice carried an edge of disbelief despite having watched her shoot for 3 deployments. Vasquez allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her muscles burned from holding position, her eye socket aching from the pressure of the scope. Sweat trickled down her spine despite the freezing temperature. Movement caught her attention. The eastern ridge, where she had spotted reinforcements earlier. 12 fighters were moving down a goat trail toward the valley, trying to flank the SEAL position. If they reached the lower rocks, they would have a clear angle on the team's cover. It would be a massacre. Sentinel to Trident, she said into the radio. Reinforcements advancing from the east. 12 fighters, 800 meters from your position and closing. I am engaging, but I need to relocate for a better angle. Mercer's voice came back strained. Copy, Sentinel. How long? 2 minutes. Make it 1. Vasquez broke position, moving in a low crouch across the rocky outcropping. Tran followed, dragging the spotting equipment. They had rehearsed this 100 times, the rapid displacement from one firing position to another, but doing it under combat conditions with lives hanging on every second was different. Every footstep felt too loud. Every shadow could hide an enemy. She found the secondary position, a shallow depression 40 meters from her original spot. The angle was worse for the main valley, but gave her a clear line on the goat trail. She dropped prone, settled the rifle, and found the lead fighter in her scope. Range 2400, Tran said. He was breathing hard from the sprint. Wind steady at 16 knots. 2400 meters. A mile and a half. At this distance, the bullet would take over 3 seconds to reach the target. She would need to lead a moving target by nearly 20 feet, accounting for their walking speed, the wind, the drop, the rotation of the earth. It was the longest shot she had ever attempted in combat. Vasquez found her center. The fear and doubt faded away, replaced by the cold mathematics of trajectory and velocity. She was not a woman with something to prove. She was not a soldier fighting for recognition. She was simply a tool designed for one purpose, and that purpose was to send a piece of metal exactly where it needed to go. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared. The bullet vanished into the darkness. 3 seconds stretched into eternity. The lead fighter pitched forward and tumbled down the trail. Tran exhaled sharply. 2,400 meters. The reinforcement column scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and into crevices. They had expected to flank an ambushed enemy. They had not expected death to reach them from nearly a mile and a half away. Vasquez chambered another round. One of the fighters broke cover, sprinting for a larger boulder. She led him by 18 feet and fired. He dropped mid-stride. 19. The remaining fighters pressed themselves into the rocks, refusing to move. She had bought the SEAL team time. Now, she just needed to keep them alive long enough for air support to arrive. Sentinel to Trident, she said. Reinforcement column suppressed. 10 remaining, holding position. You have approximately 30 minutes until air support. I will keep them off you. Mercer's response was different now. The dismissiveness was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like awe. Sentinel Trident Actual. Whoever you are, keep shooting. Vasquez settled back into her scope. She had 30 minutes of ammunition and 30 minutes of targets. She intended to use both. Mercer pressed his back against the stone wall and tried to make sense of what he was witnessing. Through his scope, he watched another fighter drop on the northern ridge, folding in on himself like a puppet with cut strings. That made 20, maybe 21. He had lost count somewhere around the 15th kill, when the impossible had become routine. 2 miles away, a woman he had dismissed as a babysitter was systematically dismantling an ambush that should have killed his entire team. Reyes crawled up beside him, keeping his head below the wall. Kowalski is stable, he said. Tourniquet is holding, but he needs evac in the next 30 minutes, or we are looking at amputation. Mercer nodded. Air support was still 25 minutes out. The math was brutal, but survivable, assuming the sniper on the ridge could keep doing what she was doing. Another fighter rose on the western approach, RPG tube on his shoulder. Mercer opened his mouth to call the warning. The fighter's head snapped back before he could speak. The RPG clattered unfired to the rocks. Sentinel, the female voice said over the radio. RPG neutralized. Western Ridge is clear. Shifting focus to remaining hostiles on the north. Mercer found himself shaking his head in disbelief. He had served with the best shooters in the world. He had trained at ranges with Olympic marksmen and special operations snipers who could thread a needle at 1,000 meters. None of them could do what this woman was doing. 6, Reyes said. His voice was strange, caught between fear and wonder. Do you know who she is? Mercer thought about the briefing room, the dismissive glance he had given her, the babysitter comment he had made sure she could hear. He thought about her response when he asked if she was qualified on the Barrett. I am qualified on everything in your armory. He had heard arrogance in those words. Now he recognized something else entirely. Confidence. The quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. No, Mercer said, but I'm going to find out. He keyed his radio. Sentinel, Trident Actual. Request status on remaining hostiles. Her response came back crisp and professional. 22 confirmed kills. Estimate 8 to 10 remaining on Northern Ridge. Reinforcement column is suppressed. 7 fighters holding position behind cover. They're not advancing. Mercer did the math. She had eliminated more than half the ambush force by herself from 2 miles away in less than 15 minutes. The fighters who remained were too terrified to move. He had called her a babysitter. A burst of automatic fire raked the top of the wall, showering him with stone fragments. One of the remaining fighters had found courage or desperation. Mercer ducked, then risked a glance over the barrier. The shooter was behind a rock formation on the northern ridge, partially concealed, firing in controlled bursts. Before Mercer could mark the position, the firing stopped. The fighter slumped forward, his weapon clattering against the rocks. Sentinel, the voice said. Hostile neutralized. You have movement at your 9 o'clock, 50 meters. Single fighter attempting to flank. Mirchirspoon. A shadow was moving through the rocks to their left, trying to work around the wall. At this range, the Overwatch sniper would not have a clear shot. Mitchell, he snapped. 9 o'clock, 50 meters. Mitchell rose from cover, his M4 already tracking. 3 quick shots, and the flanking fighter went down. Good kill, Vasquez said over the radio. Scanning for additional threats. Mercer realized something had shifted in the battle. They were no longer fighting for survival. They were mopping up. The sniper had broken the back of the ambush, and the remaining fighters knew it. They were hiding, waiting, trying to survive long enough to retreat. The radio crackled again. Trident, be advised. I am seeing movement on the suppressed reinforcement column. 3 fighters breaking cover, moving east. They are retreating. Let them go, Mercer said. Focus on anyone still engaging. Copy. He leaned back against the wall and exhaled. His hands were shaking, the adrenaline that had kept him functioning beginning to fade. Around him, his team was doing the same, the desperate tension of the firefight giving way to the hollow relief of survival. Reyes appeared at his elbow again. He was holding a tablet, the kind they use for accessing personnel files in the field. His face had gone pale. 6, he said. I pulled her service record. Mercer took the tablet. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, United States Army. Attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment. Ranger School graduate, Class 127. Advanced Sniper Course, Distinguished Graduate. 3 combat deployments with a classified addendum that required higher clearance than Mercer possessed. Below the standard information was a notation that made his stomach drop. Theater record holder, longest confirmed kill. Distance and details classified. She's a Ranger sniper, Reyes said. Top graduate of the advanced course. That classified addendum probably means she has kills on the books that would cause diplomatic problems if anyone knew about them. Mercer stared at the tablet. He had dismissed a Ranger sniper as a babysitter. He had made jokes about her qualifications while she held credentials that exceeded anyone on his team. He had walked into an ambush because he was too arrogant to listen to her warnings about choke points and lookouts. And she'd save his life anyway. Another shot echoed across the valley, distant and precise. Another fighter dropped on the northern ridge. 24, Vasquez said over the radio. Northern Ridge is clear. Remaining hostiles are withdrawing. Air support ETA 15 minutes. Mercer keyed his radio. His throat felt tight. Sentinel Trident Actual. Acknowledged. Outstanding work. There was a pause. Then her voice, calm as it had been throughout the entire engagement. Just doing my job, Lieutenant Commander. He deserved that. He deserved worse than that. But the reckoning would have to wait until they were out of this valley and his wounded man was on an operating table. For now, he simply watched the ridge lines through his scope, waiting for the helicopters, trying to reconcile the woman he had dismissed with the shooter who had just rewritten everything he thought he knew about what was possible. 2 miles away, invisible in the darkness, Elena Vasquez chambered another round and kept watch. Major Catherine Webb had commanded the Tactical Operations Center at FOB Griffin for 11 months. She had coordinated extractions under fire, managed assets across 3 provinces, and talked pilots through landings in conditions that should have been impossible. She thought she had seen everything this war could offer. She was wrong. The TOC was controlled chaos, a dozen operators working stations that tracked every friendly asset in theater. Radio traffic filled the air, overlapping voices calling positions and requesting support. On the main screen, a satellite feed showed the valley where Trident Team was pinned down, thermal signatures marking the SEAL position and the hostile forces surrounding them. Webb stood at the command station, watching the situation deteriorate. Air support was still 20 minutes out. Medevac could not land under fire. 6 Americans were trapped in a kill zone, with 1 wounded, and there was nothing she could do except watch and coordinate. Then something changed. A radio operator turned in his seat, confusion written across his face. "Major," he said, "I am getting reports from the Overwatch position. The sniper is engaging hostiles at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters." Webb frowned. That was extreme range for any shooter, the kind of distance where most trained snipers would not even attempt engagement. "What is her hit rate?" The operator checked his screen. His eyebrows rose. "She has not missed yet, ma'am. 14 confirmed kills in the last 8 minutes. Webb crossed to his station, looking over his shoulder at the data feed. The numbers did not make sense. No one shot with that accuracy at those ranges, not in combat conditions with wind and darkness and the stress of friendly lives on the line. "Who is the Overwatch sniper?" she asked. The operator pulled up the personnel file. "Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, Army Liaison, assigned as additional observation support for the extraction." Webb stared at the file. Basic information, standard qualifications, nothing that explained how this woman was shooting like a competition marksman while a battle raged around her. Something was missing. "Pull her full record," Webb said. "Everything, including classified addendums." The operator typed rapidly. A moment later, his screen populated with new information. His face went pale. "Ma'am," he said, "you need to see this." Webb leaned in. The classified section of Vasquez's file painted a very different picture than the basic record. Ranger School graduate, one of fewer than 50 women to ever complete the course. Distinguished graduate of the Army's Advanced Sniper Course. Top of her class in a cohort of 42 men. 3 combat deployments with a unit whose designation was redacted. And at the bottom, a notation that made Webb's breath catch. Theater record holder, longest confirmed kill. Distance, 2,847 meters. Target and circumstances classified. She had the longest confirmed kill in the entire theater. Nearly 2 miles. And someone had assigned her to basic Overwatch duty like she was a fresh private who needed babysitting. Webb turned to the room. "Who authorized her assignment to this mission?" A lieutenant at the planning station looked up nervously. "Joint Operations Liaison, ma'am. They requested additional observation support, and she was available." "Did anyone review her full credentials?" The lieutenant's silence was answer enough. Webb felt anger building in her chest, the cold fury of a commander watching institutional stupidity nearly cost lives. Someone had looked at Vasquez's file, seen a female Army sniper, and decided she was good enough to watch, but not important enough to properly utilize. They had not bothered to look deeper. They had not asked what she could actually do. On the satellite feed, another thermal signature disappeared from the ridgeline. Vasquez's kill count climbed to 19. The radio crackled with Mercer's voice, strained but steady. "Command, Trident Actual. Overwatch is engaging with extreme effectiveness. Request you confirm identity of sniper at OP Sentinel." Webb picked up the handset. "Trident, this is Griffin Actual. Your Overwatch is Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, 75th Ranger Regiment, distinguished graduate of Advanced Sniper Course. She holds the theater record for longest confirmed kill at nearly 2 miles. She paused, letting that sink in. You have the best shooter in Afghanistan watching your back, Lieutenant Commander. There was a long silence on the radio. Then Mercer's voice, stripped of its earlier confidence. Copy, Griffin. We are aware. Webb could hear something in his tone. Recognition. Shame. The sound of a man realizing he had badly misjudged someone. She turned back to the main screen, watching the battle unfold from above. The hostile positions were being systematically eliminated, one precise shot at a time. The SEAL team was holding position behind their cover, returning fire when targets presented themselves. But the real work was happening 2 miles away on a rocky ridge where a woman they had dismissed was saving their lives. Another radio operator spoke up. Major, I have updated count from Sentinel. 22 confirmed kills. Reinforcement column is suppressed. Estimate 10 to 12 hostiles remaining. Webb nodded. Air support ETA. 12 minutes. It was going to be enough. Against all odds, against an ambush that should have been fatal, it was going to be enough. Because someone had put a Ranger sniper on Overwatch and failed to realize what they had. Webb made a note on her tablet. When this was over, she was going to write a report that would burn through the chain of command like a wildfire. Someone was going to explain why the best shooter in theater had been treated like a disposable asset. Someone was going to answer for the institutional blindness that had nearly gotten 6 SEALs killed. But that was later. Right now, she had a battle to coordinate and a sniper to support. Griffin to Sentinel, she said into the radio. This is Major Webb. Outstanding work, Staff Sergeant. What do you need from us? Vasquez's voice came back calm and professional, as though she were discussing weather rather than combat. Griffin, Sentinel, I'm stable on ammunition. Request you advise Trident to hold position until air support arrives. I will keep the remaining hostiles suppressed. Webb allowed herself a small smile. Copy, Sentinel. Trident is advised to let you work. She set down the handset and watched the screen. 2 miles away, Elena Vasquez fired another round. Another hostile disappeared from the thermal display. 23 kills. And counting. The first mortar round exploded 30 meters from Vasquez's position, showering her and Tran with rock fragments and frozen dirt. The concussion rattled her teeth and sent her scope off target, precious seconds lost while the enemy recalibrated. They found us, Tran said. His voice was tight, but controlled. Vasquez had known it was coming. 23 kills from the same general area meant muzzle flash, meant sound signatures, meant someone with a brain would eventually triangulate her position. The only surprise was that it had taken this long. She rolled left, keeping low, pulling her rifle with her. The secondary position she had identified earlier was 40 meters east, a shallow depression behind a cluster of boulders that would mask her signature. It was not as good for angles on the valley, but it would keep her alive long enough to keep shooting. Move, she said. They scrambled across the rocks as the second mortar round hit. Closer this time. Close enough that she felt the heat of the blast on her exposed skin. Whoever was operating that tube knew what they were doing. Another 30 seconds, and they would have the range dialed in perfectly. Tran stumbled beside her as she heard him grunt in pain. She grabbed his arm, kept him moving, did not stop to assess the damage until they reached the depression and threw themselves behind the boulders. Only then did she see the blood. Shrapnel had caught Tran's left arm, a jagged piece of rock or metal buried in the meat of his bicep. Blood pulsed around the wound, not arterial but heavy, too heavy to ignore. I could still spot, he said through gritted teeth. Vasquez was already pulling the tourniquet from her kit. She wrapped it above the wound, cinched it tight, watched his face go white with pain. The bleeding slowed to a seep. You spot with your eyes, not your arm, she said. Stay conscious and call wind. I will handle the rest. She settled into the new position, finding her sight picture, scanning for the mortar team. They had to be on the northern ridge, somewhere in the rocks above the main hostile position. Mortars needed elevation and a clear arc to the target. That limited the options. There, a flash of movement between two boulders, the distinctive shape of a mortar tube being adjusted. Range was shorter than her previous targets, maybe 1,800 meters, but the angle was bad. She could only see the tube itself and a sliver of the operator's shoulder. It would have to be enough. Wind, she said. Tran's voice came back strained but steady. 14 knots, northeast. Gusting to 20. The third mortar round launched, a hollow thump echoing across the ridge. Vasquez watched it arc through the darkness, tracking its trajectory. It was going to hit close. She ignored it. Her crosshairs settled on the exposed shoulder of the mortar operator. At this range, a shoulder shot would not be immediately fatal, but it would take him out of the fight. And if she was lucky, he would shift when hit, expose more of himself for a follow-up. The mortar round exploded 20 meters away. The shockwave hit her like a physical blow, dust and debris pelting her back. She held her position, held her breath, held her focus on the tiny target in her scope. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The round flew. 1,800 meters of darkness and wind and gravity. The shoulder disappeared in a spray of red. The mortar operator lurched sideways, and for one brief moment his head came into view above the rocks. Vasquez worked the bolt, chambered, fired again in a single fluid motion. The head snapped back. The mortar went silent. 24, Tran said. His voice was weaker now. Vasquez allowed herself a breath. The immediate threat was neutralized, but their position was compromised. Any fighter with a radio would be calling in their location. They needed to move again, and Tran was in no condition for another sprint across open ground. She keyed her radio. Sentinel to Trident. Position compromised by mortar fire. Spotters wounded. I am displacing to tertiary position, but will have reduced angle on the valley. Mercer's response came back immediately. Copy, Sentinel. What do you need? Time, she said. Air support, ETA. 8 minutes. 8 minutes. She had been shooting for 17, and it felt like hours. Her shoulder throbbed. Her eye socket ached from the constant pressure of the scope. Sweat had frozen on her skin, leaving her chilled and clammy beneath her uniform. But there were still hostiles in the valley. There were still SEALs counting on her to keep them alive. Moving now, she said. Going dark on comms for 2 minutes. She helped Tran to his feet. He swayed, caught himself, nodded grimly. They moved together through the rocks, slower than before. Tran's injured arm pressed against his chest. The tertiary position was 60 meters south, a narrow ledge that overlooked the valley from a different angle. It was exposed, no overhead cover, no protection from return fire, but had sight lines. They reached the ledge, and Vasquez dropped prone, settling her rifle on the rocky surface. The valley spread out below her, the SEAL position visible as a cluster of thermal signatures behind the stone wall. The remaining hostiles had pulled back to the far ridge, grouping together, probably planning their next move. She counted 7 heat signatures on the ridge. The reinforcement column had 4 more, still hiding behind cover on the eastern approach. 11 total, down from the original 40+. Tran collapsed beside her, his breathing ragged. His face had gone gray, shock setting in from blood loss and pain. He would not last much longer without medical attention. Vasquez made her decision. She found the largest cluster of hostiles on the ridge, 3 fighters grouped behind a rock formation, probably conferring with each other. Range was 2,000 meters, wind had shifted again, conditions were deteriorating by the minute. She fired. The first fighter dropped. The other 2 scattered, but not fast enough. She worked the bolt, acquired, fired. Second fighter down. The third dove behind cover before she could track him. Smart, but it did not matter. He was one man against an extraction force with helicopter gunships 8 minutes away. 26, Tran whispered. Vasquez chambered another round and kept her eye on the scope. 8 minutes. 11 hostiles. 1 wounded spotter. She had faced worse odds and won. She would win this too. The wind howled across the ridge, and she waited for her next target to make a mistake. Mercer watched through his scope as another fighter fell on the distant ridge. 26 kills. 27. The woman 2 miles away was not just saving his team. She was dismantling an entire enemy force with the cold precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. And he had called her babysitter. The memory burned in his chest, sharper than the cold, more painful than the bruises from diving behind cover. He had made that comment deliberately, loud enough for her to hear, playing to his team's expectations. Navy SEALs did not need Army support. They certainly did not need a female sniper watching over them, like children who could not handle themselves. He had been so certain, so arrogant, so completely, devastatingly wrong. Reyes appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand. His expression carried the same weight that had settled over Mercer since learning who Vasquez really was. 6, he said. I dug deeper into her record. The classified stuff. Mercer did not want to know. He needed to know. Tell me. Reyes scrolled through the file. 3 deployments, all with Ranger units in direct action roles. First deployment, she logged 18 confirmed kills in 4 months. Second deployment, she was attached to a joint task force running operations in Syria. Her record there is completely redacted, but there's a notation about a diplomatic incident involving a foreign national. The shot that could not be officially acknowledged. Mercer remembered the reference in her basic file. Someone important had died at the end of her rifle, important enough that the kill had to be buried. Third deployment, Reyes continued. She was pulled from her unit and assigned to the Asymmetric Warfare Group. Spent 8 months developing new engagement protocols for extreme long-range shooting. She literally wrote the manual on shots beyond 2,000 meters. Mercer closed his eyes. She wrote the manual. The woman he had dismissed as a babysitter had literally written the training doctrine for the kind of shooting she was doing right now. There's more, Reyes said. His voice had gone quiet. She put in for Special Operations Selection twice. Delta first, then CAG. Both times she was rejected. Not for performance. Her scores were top percentile across every category. Then why? Reyes turned the tablet so Mercer could see the screen. The rejection notes were brief, bureaucratic, utterly damning. Candidate does not meet unit composition requirements. No further explanation, no appeal process, no acknowledgement that they had turned away one of the most skilled shooters in the entire military because she was a woman. She should be in Delta, Mercer said. The words felt like ash in his mouth. She should be running her own team. Instead, she's on a ridge 2 miles away saving our lives because someone decided she was good enough to watch but not good enough to fight. A shot echoed across the valley. Another fighter dropped. 28. Mercer keyed his radio. The words he needed to say felt inadequate, but he said them anyway. Sentinel, Trident Actual. I need to tell you something. Her voice came back steady, professional, utterly focused on her work. Go ahead, Trident. He took a breath. The babysitter comment. What I said in the briefing. I was wrong. Not just wrong about you. Wrong about everything I assumed the moment I saw you. Silence on the radio. For a long moment, Mercer thought she might not respond. Then her voice, softer now, but still controlled. I have heard worse, Lieutenant Commander, and I have proven them wrong every time. Mercer felt something shift in his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but acknowledgement. Recognition between 2 soldiers who understood what it meant to be judged before being seen. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, he said. Ranger Sniper School, Class 127. I looked up your record. You should be leading a special missions unit, not pulling Overwatch for operators who do not deserve your support. Another pause. When she spoke again, he could hear something beneath the professional calm. Something that might have been gratitude. The system does not always put people where they belong, she said. But the work matters. The people we protect matter. That is why I am here. It was more than he deserved. More grace than he had shown her. Reyes was watching him, with an expression Mercer could not quite read. The other SEALs had heard the exchange over the team frequency. Mitchell and Torres exchanged glances. Even Kowalski, still pale from blood loss, managed a small nod. The team dynamic had shifted. The easy arrogance they had carried into the briefing room was gone, replaced by something more honest. They had walked into a trap because they had not listened to warnings. They had survived because a woman they had dismissed had refused to let them die. Movement on the northern ridge caught Mercer's attention. 3 fighters breaking cover, sprinting toward a new position. He opened his mouth to call the target. Vasquez fired 3 times in rapid succession. All three fighters dropped before they had covered 10 meters. 31 confirmed, she said over the radio. Air support ETA 3 minutes. Remaining hostiles are attempting to withdraw. Mercer watched the surviving fighters scramble back from the ridgeline, abandoning their positions, fleeing toward the mountain passes. They had come to kill Americans. They were leaving broken and decimated, destroyed by a single shooter they had never seen. Let them run, Mercer said. Focus on any threats to our position. Copy, Trident. The distant thunder of helicopter rotors reached his ears, growing louder with each passing second. Air support, finally arriving after the battle was already won. They would provide cover for extraction, ensure safe passage to the medevac site, take credit in the after-action report for securing the area. But Mercer knew the truth. Every man on his team knew the truth. Elena Vasquez had saved them. Not the helicopters, not the air support, not the institutional might of the United States military. One woman with a rifle and the skill to use it at distances that should have been impossible. He owed her his life. They all did. And he was going to make sure everyone knew it. The Apache gunships crested the eastern ridge like angry hornets, their rotors slicing the pre-dawn air with a sound that meant salvation. Vasquez watched them through her scope as they banked over the valley, their sensors sweeping the terrain for remaining threats. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the cold focus that had sustained her through the last 23 minutes begin to crack, exhaustion seeping through the fractures. 31 confirmed kills, 2,400 meters at the longest range. Her shoulder was a mass of bruised tissue, her eye socket throbbing from the constant pressure of the scope. Tran lay beside her, conscious but barely, his wounded arm clutched against his chest. The gunships opened fire on the retreating fighters, their chain guns tearing through the mountain passes with brutal efficiency. The remaining hostiles scattered like insects, disappearing into ravines and caves where the helicopters could not follow. It did not matter. They were broken, combat ineffective, no longer a threat to the SEAL team in the valley below. Sentinel to Trident, Vasquez said into her radio. Air support is engaging. Remaining hostiles in retreat. You are clear for extraction. Mercer's voice came back heavy with something she could not quite identify. Copy, Sentinel. Medevac is inbound for Kowalski. We are moving to the LZ. Vasquez watched through her scope as the SEALs emerged from behind their stone wall, moving in tactical formation toward the extraction point. They looked different than they had going in. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by the careful movements of men who understood how close they had come to dying. She tracked them until they reached the landing zone, her crosshairs sweeping the surrounding terrain for any threat she might have missed. Old habits. The battle was over, but her body had not received the message yet. Tran stirred beside her. His voice was weak, but carried a familiar dry humor. You gonna keep shooting, or can we go home now? Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. Maybe one more. There's a rock over there that looked at me funny. Tran laughed, then winced as the movement jarred his wounded arm. I will put it in the report. Staff Sergeant Vasquez engages hostile geology at 2,000 meters. The medevac helicopter touched down in the valley, its crew chief jumping out to help load Kowalski onto a stretcher. Even from 2 miles away, Vasquez could see the efficiency of their movements, the practiced choreography of soldiers who had done this too many times. A second helicopter was lifting off from the valley floor, banking toward her position on the ridge, coming to extract her and Tran. She began breaking down her rifle, her hands moving through the familiar motions without conscious thought. Stock folded, scope covered, barrel protected. The weapon that had saved 6 lives went back into its case like it was just another piece of equipment. Movement in her peripheral vision. She spun, hand going her sidearm, before she recognized the shape of a Blackhawk settling onto the rocky ledge 50 meters from her position. The rotors kept spinning as the crew chief jumped out and ran toward them, medical bag in hand. He took one look at Tran and called for a stretcher. Vasquez helped load her spotter onto the helicopter, securing his harness while the medics started in 4 line. Tran's eyes met hers as the morphine began to take effect. Hell of a morning, he said. She squeezed his uninjured hand. You did good. Wind calls were perfect. His eyes drifted closed. You did the hard part. The crew chief touched her shoulder, gesturing toward a seat. Vasquez climbed aboard. Her rifle case clutched against her chest. The helicopter lifted off, banking away from OP's Sentinel, and she watched the rocky outcropping shrink below her. 23 minutes ago, she had set up her rifle on those rocks without knowing she was about to fight the battle of her life. The flight to the valley floor took less than a minute. As they descended, Vasquez saw the SEAL team clustered near the extraction point, watching her helicopter approach. Mercer stood apart from the others, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. The Blackhawk touched down, and Vasquez stepped out onto the valley floor. The air smelled like cordite and blood, the aftermath of violence that had nearly claimed 6 American lives. Mercer walked toward her. He was taller than she had realized, broad-shouldered, the kind of physical presence that usually made her feel small. But she did not feel small now. She felt tired, bruised, and strangely hollow, the adrenaline crash hitting her in waves. They stood facing each other in the rotor wash, the noise making conversation impossible. Mercer did not try to speak. Instead, he snapped to attention and rendered a salute so crisp it could have been on a parade ground. Around him, the other SEALs followed suit. 5 men, some of them wounded, all of them exhausted, standing at attention and saluting a woman they had dismissed hours earlier. Vasquez returned the salute, holding it for a long moment before dropping her hand. The helicopters spooled up around them, preparing for the final extraction. Mercer gestured toward the lead aircraft, and they walked together toward the open door. No words yet. Words would come later, at the FOB, in the after-action reports, in the conversations that would reshape how these men understood capability and prejudice and the cost of assumptions. For now, there was only the flight home and the knowledge that everyone who had gone into the valley was coming out alive. Because of her, Petty Officer Danny Reyes had seen things in his 6 years with the teams that would haunt him until he died. Firefights in Ramadi where the streets ran red. Night raids in Yemen where children screamed as their fathers were dragged away. The slow death of a friend in a helicopter crash, burning alive while Reyes watched helplessly from 50 meters away. But he had never seen anything like what happened in that valley. The helicopter banked over FOB Griffin, and Reyes watched the base spread out below them. Medical teams were already waiting on the tarmac, ready to rush Kowalski into surgery. The rest of them would be debriefed, examined, and eventually released to process what had happened in their own ways. Reyes was not sure he could process it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He looked across the helicopter bay at Vasquez. She sat with her rifle case across her knees, her eyes closed, her face slack with exhaustion. She looked smaller now than she had in the briefing room, diminished somehow by the weight of what she had done. But Reyes knew that was an illusion. There was nothing small about this woman. 31 confirmed kills. The number kept echoing in his head, impossible and undeniable. He had watched some of those shots through his own scope, tracking the targets as they fell at distances that should have been beyond human capability. Each kill had been clean, precise, almost surgical. No wastidrones, no misses after that first ranging shot. Just death delivered from 2 miles away with the consistency of a machine. Except she was not a machine. She was a woman who had been dismissed as a babysitter, assigned to a mission where no one expected her to matter. And she had saved all of them anyway. The helicopter touched down on the tarmac, and the organized chaos of a combat medical response engulfed them. Kowalski was rushed to the surgical unit, medics swarming around his stretcher. Tran followed on a second stretcher, his arm immobilized, his face pale but stable. Reyes climbed out of the helicopter and stood on the tarmac, watching the controlled pandemonium. His team gathered around him, Mitchell and Torres and the others, all of them wearing the same stunned expression he felt on his own face. Mercer appeared at his shoulder. Their commander had aged 10 years in the last hour, the easy confidence stripped away to reveal something rawer underneath. She did it, Reyes said. He was not sure why he felt the need to state the obvious. Maybe because saying it out loud made it real. She actually did it. Mercer nodded. I know. We would be dead without her. All of us. I know, Mercer said again. His voice carried a weight that Reyes had never heard before. And we treated her like she did not matter. Reyes thought about the briefing room, the smirks and sidelong glances, the way they had dismissed her without a second thought. He had been part of it, not as vocal as Mercer, but complicit in his silence. He had looked at her and seen what he expected to see, not what was actually there. Across the tarmac, Vasquez was climbing out of the helicopter. A medical officer approached her, gesturing toward the aid station, but she waved him off. She stood alone for a moment, rifle case in hand, watching the chaos around Kowalski's stretcher with an expression Reyes could not read. Then she turned and walked toward the debriefing building, her stride steady despite the exhaustion that had to be crushing her. She did not look at any of them. She did not need to. Reyes made a decision. He broke away from his team and jogged to catch up with her. Staff Sergeant. Vasquez stopped, turned to face him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, dark circles carved beneath them, but her gaze was sharp and clear. Petty officer, she said. Reyes struggled to find the words. Everything he wanted to say felt inadequate, too small for what she had done. Finally, he settled on the simplest truth he could offer. I am sorry, he said, for the briefing room, for not speaking up when I should have, for assuming you were less than you are. Vasquez studied him for a long moment. He could not tell what she was thinking, whether she was angry or resigned or simply too tired to care. You have nothing to apologize for, she said finally. You did not say anything. I did not say anything against it either. And that is the same thing. Something shifted in her expression. A flicker of surprise, maybe a recognition. She had probably heard 1,000 apologies from men who did not mean them, excuses dressed up as contrition. Reyes hoped she could see that his was different. Most people never figure that out, she said. It took courage to say it. Reyes shook his head. You are the one with courage. I just watched. Vasquez looked past him toward the surgical unit where Kowalski was fighting for his leg, maybe his life. We all have our parts to play, she said. Yours was to keep your team together under fire. Mine was to keep you alive long enough to do it. She turned and continued toward the debriefing building, leaving Reyes standing on the tarmac with the weight of her words settling over him. He had spent his career believing that courage meant kicking down doors and clearing rooms, the loud and violent work of direct action. But watching Vasquez walk away, he understood that courage came in quieter forms too. The courage to excel when no one expected it. The courage to save people who had dismissed you. The courage to keep going when the world told you to stop. Reyes returned to his team. They were watching him, questions in their eyes. She's the real deal, he said. Better than any of us. No one disagreed. The debriefing room at FOB Griffin was smaller than Vasquez expected, a cramped space with plywood walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. She sat at a metal table across from 2 intelligence officers who had been recording her account for the last 45 minutes. They asked about ranges. They asked about wind conditions. They asked about target acquisition and shot placement and the sequence of her kills. They wrote everything down with the careful precision of men who understood they were documenting something unprecedented. Vasquez answered their questions mechanically, her body running on fumes while her mind replayed the battle in fragments. The first shot at the machine gunner. The mortar rounds exploding near her position. Trans blood on her hands as she applied the tourniquet. 31 lives ended by her rifle. 31 men who would never go home. She did not feel guilt. She had learned long ago to separate the act from the aftermath, to understand that the men she killed would have killed Americans without hesitation. But she felt the weight of it, the heaviness that always followed combat, the knowledge that she had changed the world in ways that could never be undone. The door opened, and Lieutenant Commander Mercer stepped inside. The intelligence officers looked up, surprised by the interruption. Give us the room, Mercer said. It was not a request. The officers exchanged glances, then gathered their materials and filed out. The door closed behind them, leaving Vasquez alone with the man who had dismissed her 6 hours earlier. Mercer stood by the door for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he walked to the table and sat down across from her, the same position the intelligence officers had occupied. "I requested permission to speak with you privately," he said. Major Webb approved it. Vasquez waited. She was too tired for games, too exhausted to pretend she did not know why he was here. Mercer placed his hands flat on the table, a deliberate gesture of openness. "I have been doing this for 15 years, he said. "I have led missions on 6 continents. I have worked with the best operators in the world, people whose names will never appear in any record because what they do is too classified to acknowledge." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I have never seen anyone shoot the way you shoot. Not at those ranges. Not under those conditions. What you did today was not just exceptional. It was unprecedented." Vasquez met his eyes. "I was doing my job." "No." Mercer shook his head. "You were doing a job that no one believed you could do, that no one gave you the chance to do, because they looked at you and saw something other than what you are. I looked at you and saw something other than what you are." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and uncomfortable. "I called you a babysitter," Mercer continued. "I made sure you heard it. I wanted you to know that I did not think you mattered, that your presence on my mission was an inconvenience I had to tolerate rather than an asset I should value." Vasquez felt something shift in her chest, a knot of old anger loosening slightly. She had heard variations of this speech before, men who realized too late that they had underestimated her, who offered apologies that cost them nothing. But Mercer's voice carried something different. Not just regret. Shame. "I have thought about why I did it," he said. "The easy answer is that I am a product of a system that taught me to see women as support rather than operators. That I absorb assumptions I never questioned because questioning them was uncomfortable." He leaned forward. "But that is an excuse. The truth is simpler and uglier. I was arrogant. I believed that my experience made me incapable of being wrong, that my judgment was infallible because I had survived situations that killed lesser men. And that arrogance nearly got my entire team killed today." Vasquez considered his words. She had spent her career fighting against the assumptions he described, proving herself over and over to men who refused to see her capabilities until she forced them to look. Most of them never acknowledged their blindness, never admitted that they had been wrong. Mercer was doing something rare. "I do not need your apology," she said finally. "I did not save your team because I wanted recognition. I saved them because that is what I trained to do." "I know," Mercer said, "and that makes it worse. You did not owe us anything. We gave you every reason to let us fail, and you saved us anyway. That is not how it works." Vasquez leaned back in her chair. "When you're in the field, the only thing that matters is the mission and the people counting on you. Everything else, the insults, the assumptions, the men who think you do not belong, you leave that behind when the shooting starts. If I carried that weight into combat, I would have missed my first shot." Mercer studied her face. "How do you do it? How do you keep going when the system fights you at every turn?" Vasquez thought about the question. She thought about Ranger School, the instructors who predicted her failure. She thought about the Delta rejection, the bureaucratic language that hid simple prejudice. She thought about every mission where she had to prove herself again because no one remembered what she had proven before. "I focus on what I can control," she said. "I cannot change how people see me before they know me, but I can change how they see me after. Every shot I make, every mission I complete, every life I save, that becomes part of the record. Eventually, the record speaks louder than the assumptions." Mercer nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, placing it on the table between them. His trident pin, the gold insignia of a Navy SEAL, the symbol of everything he had achieved in his career. "I want you to have this," he said, "not as an apology, as an acknowledgement. You are the best shooter I have ever seen, and you deserve to be recognized by the community you saved today." Vasquez looked at the pin, but did not touch it. "That belongs to you. It belongs to someone who earned it." Mercer pushed it closer. "You earned it today more than I ever did." She picked up the trident, feeling its weight in her palm. A symbol she had never been allowed to pursue, offered freely by a man who had dismissed her hours before. "Thank you," she said. Mercer stood. "No, thank you. For saving my team. For being better than we deserved." He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did today," he said. "Not just the official reports. Everyone. Your name is going to be remembered." Then he was gone, and Vasquez was alone with the weight of a trident pin and the strange, unfamiliar sensation of being truly seen. 3 months later, the sun rose over Fort Benning like it did every morning, indifferent to the lives being shaped beneath it. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez stood at the window of her new office, watching the sniper candidates gather on the training field below. 18 men and 2 women, all of them about to begin the most difficult course of their military careers. The paperwork on her desk told a story of rapid change. Major Webb's report had burned through the chain of command exactly as she had promised, igniting a review of joint operations protocols that reached all the way to the Pentagon. New policies required full credential reviews for all personnel assigned to multi-service missions, regardless of gender. The assumption that had nearly killed 6 SEALs would not be repeated. Kowalski had kept his leg. The surgeons at Landstuhl had worked for 11 hours to repair the damage, and after 6 weeks of rehabilitation, he was walking again. He had sent her a letter, handwritten on Navy stationery, thanking her for his life and his career. She kept it in her desk drawer, beneath the Bronze Star citation that bore her name. The medal ceremony had been small, held at FOB Griffin before she rotated home. Mercer had presented it personally, his team standing at attention behind him. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism, of 31 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, of actions that saved the lives of 6 American service members. It did not capture the full truth of that morning, but official citations never did. What mattered more was what happened after. Mercer had kept his promise. He told everyone, the SEAL community, the Ranger Regiment, the Special Operations networks that operated beneath the surface of official channels. The story spread through barracks and briefing rooms, growing with each telling until Elena Vasquez became something more than a name. She became a legend, and legends attracted attention. The Army Marksmanship Unit had come calling first, offering her a position developing next-generation engagement protocols for extreme long-range shooting. It was the kind of assignment that would have been unthinkable a year ago, a woman shaping the future of precision marksmanship for the entire military. She had accepted without hesitation. But that was only the beginning. The real change was happening in rooms she would never see, decisions made by generals and politicians who had read Webb's report and recognized its implications. If one female sniper could outshoot every operator in theater, how many others were being wasted in positions that failed to utilize their capabilities? How much talent was the military losing to assumptions that had never been examined? The questions were uncomfortable. The answers would take years to implement. But the conversation had started, and conversations had a way of becoming policy when enough people demanded change. Vasquez turned from the window as her assistant knocked on the door. "The candidates are assembled, Staff Sergeant." She picked up her rifle case and walked out onto the training field. The candidates snapped to attention as she approached, 18 men and 2 women standing in a perfect line. Some of them looked skeptical, the expression she had seen 1,000 times before. A woman teaching them to shoot. The doubt was written on their faces like a challenge. She had seen that look in Mercer's eyes 3 months ago. She knew exactly what it meant, and she knew exactly what came after. "At ease," she said. Her voice carried across the field without effort, the command presence she had earned through years of proving herself in situations these candidates could not imagine. She set down her rifle case and opened it, revealing the M2010 that had saved 6 lives in an Afghan valley. The candidates stared at it, recognizing the weapon, perhaps recognizing its significance. "My name is Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez," she said. "I am a graduate of Ranger School and the Advanced Sniper Course. I hold the theater record for longest confirmed kill in Afghanistan at 2,847 meters. 3 months ago, I engaged 40 hostile fighters from a distance of 2 miles and eliminated 31 of them in 23 minutes. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. Some of you are wondering if a woman can teach you anything about shooting. Some of you have already decided that I do not belong here, that my presence is a political gesture rather than a professional qualification. Her eyes swept the line, finding the skeptics holding their gazes until they looked away. By the end of this course, you will understand that doubt is a luxury you cannot afford. In combat, the only thing that matters is whether you can hit your target. Not your gender, not your background, not the assumptions other people make about you. Just a shot. She lifted the rifle from its case, feeling its familiar weight settle into her hands. I'm going to teach you to make shots that seem impossible. I'm going to push you harder than you have ever been pushed, demand more than you think you can give, and accept nothing less than excellence. Some of you will fail. Some of you will quit. But those of you who make it through will be the best shooters in the world. The skepticism on their faces was fading, replaced by something else. Respect, maybe, or the beginning of it. If you have ever been underestimated, you know what this moment feels like. The moment when someone finally sees you for what you are, not what they assumed you would be. Drop a comment and tell me about a time when you proved someone wrong, when you showed them that their assumptions were nothing compared to your abilities. Vasquez chambered round and raised the rifle to her shoulder, sighting downrange at a target most of them probably could not even see. Watch closely, she said. I'm only going to show you this once. She squeezed the trigger. 1,000 meters away, the target shattered. The candidates stared in silence. The skepticism was gone now, replaced by the wide-eyed recognition of people who understood they were standing in the presence of something extraordinary. Vasquez lowered the rifle and allowed herself a small smile. Now, she said, let's begin.